Julianne didn't look up. She kept her eyes locked on the dotted line, a thin black seam running across the bottom of the last page of the dissolution agreement. The air in the conference room was thick, not just with the scent of imported teak and ozone, but with the suffocating weight of 8 wasted years. She held the pen, a heavy obsidian Visconti that Marcus had given her for their 5th anniversary, a gift that symbolized his belief that she should only ever sign documents that he approved of. Across the table sat Marcus Vance, her soon-to-be ex-husband. He was the picture of tailored success, a charcoal Tom Ford suit, hair perfectly groomed with a touch of distinguished gray, and a platinum Patek Philippe watch that cost more than Julianne's entire college education. He wasn't nervous. He was bored. He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, the polished leather of his loafer gleaming under the recessed lighting of his lawyer's 52nd floor office, overlooking the rainy Seattle waterfront. "We don't have all day, Julianne," Marcus finally drawled, his voice carrying that familiar low rumble of privileged impatience. "There are acquisitions waiting. My time is exponentially more valuable than yours, even if you are about to receive a substantial, frankly generous settlement." Julianne felt the familiar sting, but she didn't flinch. She hadn't flinched in years. That was the trick to surviving Marcus. You had to become a statue, a beautiful silent fixture that required no attention and offered no challenge. She finally pressed the tip of the Visconti to the paper. The scratch of the nib was the only sound in the room, louder than the rain hitting the glass, louder than the silent argument raging in her heart. She signed her name, Julianne Thorne Vance. When she lifted the pen, she felt a profound lightness, as if a lead cloak had just slid off her shoulders. It wasn't relief yet. It was the absence of pain. The lawyer, a twitchy man named Mr. Abernathy, who looked like he hadn't slept properly since passing the bar, carefully slid the document away from her. He placed a yellow sticky note on the signature line and offered it to Marcus. Marcus didn't even pick up the pen. He signaled to Abernathy with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Witness it. I don't need to sign yet. I wanted to ensure she was fully committed first." He then turned his attention back to Julianne, his eyes cold and clinical, assessing her like a piece of depreciating machinery he was finally consigning to the scrapyard. "Now that the unpleasantries are concluded, let's review the terms one last time," Marcus began, his tone shifting into his benevolent CEO voice. "You get the brownstone in Queen Anne, which, while damp, is perfectly adequate for a single woman with no career prospects. You get the car, the Tesla, not the Aston Martin, obviously, and a lump sum of $5 million. He paused, clearly expecting gratitude, or at least awe. $5 million, Julianne. That is far more than you contributed to this marriage, financially or otherwise. It is enough to keep you comfortable, provided you are wise with your investments. I suggest a municipal bond fund. Don't try anything flashy. You lack the acumen." Julianne watched him. She remembered when she had loved that arrogant confidence. Now it was just noise. She noted how he hadn't mentioned her literacy foundation, the small, struggling non-profit she had tried to open before he pressured her to close it, because it looked quaint and bad for his corporate image. He hadn't mentioned the years she spent managing his networking dinners and hosting galas that netted his conglomerate hundreds of millions. He saw her as a zero-sum equation, a beautiful liability being liquidated. "I have also arranged for a logistics team to collect your personal effects next Tuesday," Marcus continued, pulling out his tablet and checking a notification. "I need the Queen Anne keys back by Wednesday noon for a final inspection. I'll have one of my associates handle the transfer of funds. You should see the first installment hitting your account within 72 hours. He stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't offer a goodbye. "Try not to embarrass me, Julianne," he said, adjusting his silk tie. "The Vance name is valuable, and now that you won't be carrying it, Try to maintain some semblance of dignity. He looked at Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer. Is that all? Good. Send the final paperwork to my office for review. Abernathy, remind me to deduct your fee from her settlement. Seems only fair. Marcus started walking towards the door. Julianne remained seated, her spine perfectly straight. She felt the heavy silence return, but this time it was hers. It was a silence of control, not submission. Mr. Abernathy, visibly sweating under the pressure of having just witnessed the most ruthless corporate divorce he'd ever seen, gathered the documents. He offered Julianne a sympathetic, if nervous, smile. Mrs. Vance, Julianne, I'm sorry it came to this. I truly hope you find peace. Julianne finally raised her eyes. They were the color of slate-gray storm clouds, and for the first time in years they held a spark that was distinctly her own. Thank you, Mr. Abernathy, she said, her voice low and steady. But please, it's Ms. Thorne, Julianne Thorne. I won't be needing the Vance name anymore. She reached down for her handbag, a vintage leather tote she hadn't used since before she met Marcus. She pulled out her own phone. It wasn't the latest holographic model Marcus insisted on buying her. It was a secure, ruggedized device she had kept hidden in a safe deposit box for the last 4 years. She tapped the screen once. It was a single silent notification sent to an encrypted server. Marcus, standing near the door, paused, annoyed that she was still lingering. Are you waiting for a rideshare, Julianne? I assume you didn't drive here. You know how I feel about you driving in the downtown corridor? No, Marcus, she replied, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. I'm not waiting for a rideshare. Just as Marcus reached for the brushed steel handle of the office door, the silence of the 52nd floor was shattered. It wasn't a phone ringing or a siren wailing. It was a deep, rhythmic thrumming sound that resonated through the reinforced glass of the skyscraper. It sounded like a turbine. No, many turbines. Expensive, powerful, and idling right below them. Mr. Abernathy frowned, walking quickly to the window. What in the world is that noise? Is there a military exercise? The governor usually gives notice. Marcus scoffed. Probably some incompetent construction crew blocking the avenue. Seattle traffic management is a joke. But Julianne didn't move. She simply looked at the digital clock on the conference room wall. 2:15 p.m., right on time. Mr. Abernathy pressed his face against the floor-to-ceiling glass, peering down at the rain-slicked street below. His jaw slackened. He blinked hard as if the altitude was playing tricks on his eyes. Marcus, you need to see this, Abernathy whispered, his voice laced with confusion and sudden alarm. Marcus, annoyed at the interruption, reluctantly strode over to the window, sliding his tablet back into his briefcase. The view from the 52nd floor was commanding. Down on 4th Avenue, the usual gridlock of electric buses and delivery drones had been brought to a complete standstill. The reason was impossible to miss. Lining the entire block, stretching back toward the corner of Pine, was a procession of vehicles so sleek and uniformly matte black that it looked like a sci-fi paramilitary convoy. They were armored SUVs, not just standard luxury trucks, but extended customized behemoths with reinforced chassis. Well, look at that, Marcus said, trying to sound unimpressed. Someone important is in town, probably a tech delegation from Tokyo. What's the count, Abernathy? 6, 7. Abernathy was counting slowly, his finger tracing the line of vehicles parked bumper to bumper, guarded by 2 imposing figures in tactical suits, standing near the curb. Marcus? Abernathy breathed out, turning to look from the street to Julianne, his eyes wide with disbelief. That's not a delegation. They are all parked right outside this building's main entrance, and there are 10 of them. Exactly 10. Marcus squinted, straining to see the front vehicle. The first SUV was massive, its tinted windows absorbing the light, its grille adorned not with a standard manufacturer badge, but with a small, discreet platinum geometric crest. 10 armored transports for one person? That's absurd, Marcus scoffed, though a thread of unease was starting to weave through his confidence. It must be a head of state or something. Then they saw the movement. From the first vehicle, a door swung open silently. A man stepped out. He was enormous, built like a mountain, wearing a suit that clearly concealed body armor. He didn't look like a driver. He looked like a warlord's personal guard. He walked to the back door, opened it, and stood at attention. Then the driver of the second SUV did the same. And the third. All the way down the line, 10 doors opened simultaneously, and 10 security personnel stood waiting, flanking the line of cars like a high-stakes Praetorian guard. Marcus felt a sudden cold dread grip him. He turned away from the window, looking directly at Julianne Thorne. She was still sitting composed, serene. The ghost of a smile was now slightly more defined. "Julianne?" Marcus demanded, his voice dropping its smooth polish and becoming sharp. "What is going on? Did you arrange some kind of press stunt? If you think you can embarrass me with paparazzi?" Julianne slowly rose to her feet. She picked up her vintage tote and walked toward the window, standing beside Marcus. She didn't look down at the street. She looked at him. "You said I needed to maintain dignity, Marcus," she said softly, her voice carrying a resonance he had never heard before. "You said I was receiving a generous settlement. You said I lacked the acumen for investments." She reached into her bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper folded neatly in thirds. It wasn't the divorce agreement. It was a portfolio summary. She handed it to him. "That $5 million you offered me? That was the amount of my initial investment 6 years ago," she stated. "The investment I told you about, the one you dismissed as Julianne's little book club fund and forced me to hide." Marcus unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the numbers. His face went instantly pale. The statement wasn't from a local bank. It was from the Vance Group's biggest emerging rival, Ion Robotics, a Boston-based firm specializing in neural link AI and heavy automation. The numbers were staggering. The initial $5 million had become something exponentially larger. "This is impossible," Marcus stammered, his hand trembling as he held the paper. "This is fabricated. You don't understand these figures. You couldn't have managed this portfolio." "Oh, but I did," Julianne corrected him gently. "While I was managing your galas and planning your board retreats, I was also managing my own future. You taught me one thing very well, Marcus. Always ensure you have full control over your assets." "Who is picking you up?" Marcus demanded, ignoring the paper, the shame of the financial revelation momentarily eclipsed by the public spectacle unfolding below. "Who do you know that commands a convoy of 10 armored units in the middle of a workday?" Julianne finally looked down at the street. The lead security guard had just looked up right at the 52nd floor window and gave a crisp, formal nod. "They're not for me, Marcus," Julianne said, her voice now ringing with quiet triumph. "They are for my team." She turned and walked toward the door, pausing just before she reached the hallway. "You see, Marcus, you always assumed I was just a trophy, a quiet accessory," she continued. "But when you lock a woman away in a golden cage, she has a lot of time to read, a lot of time to plan, and a lot of time to work. Everything you thought I was doing, the library volunteering, the late nights organizing, that was me building the infrastructure for what I'm doing now." She reached for the door handle. "I signed the divorce silently because I didn't need to argue over your crumbs. I was already sitting at the head of a much bigger table." With that, Julianne Thorne stepped out of the conference room and into the hallway. Marcus, still holding the impossible financial statement, looked at Abernathy, who was now frozen, mouth agape. "Abernathy, call downstairs! Find out who is in those cars! Marcus roared, finally snapping out of his shock. Abernathy fumbled for the intercom, his voice shaking as he spoke to the lobby security. This is Abernathy, 52nd floor. We have an urgent inquiry about the vehicles blocking 4th Avenue. Who are they registered to? Who are they waiting for? The voice crackled back from the lobby speaker, sounding stunned. Sir, the registration is masked. They are all leased by various holding firms, but they are all ultimately controlled by a single entity, the Thorn Sovereign Fund. Abernathy looked at Marcus, who looked like he'd been hit by a freight train. And who are they waiting for? Marcus demanded, his voice a tight, high rasp of disbelief. They are waiting for Ms. Thorn, sir, the security guard confirmed. They have already secured the main entrance and cleared a path. They are waiting for Julianne Thorn. Downstairs, the atmosphere was electric. The 10 SUVs stretched out, their presence demanding attention. As Julianne stepped into the main lobby, escorted by Mr. Abernathy's utterly bewildered assistant, the lobby doors swung open. The 10 security guards, the ones who had been waiting by the cars, marched inside in perfect formation. They lined up facing the elevators, forming a corridor of expensive tactical fabric and intimidating muscle. Julianne walked through this corridor. She didn't look left or right. She walked toward the front doors, toward the rain and the waiting cars. The security guard from the lead SUV, the one built like a fortress, stepped forward. He didn't speak. He simply offered his hand, palm up, in a gesture of profound respect. Julianne took his hand. As she reached the curb, the doors of all 10 SUVs opened simultaneously. It wasn't just a driver and a security guard in each car. Each vehicle was already occupied. In the first SUV sat a woman Julianne's age, sharp, wearing smart glasses displaying real-time analytics. In the second sat a man in a headset, clearly directing a major global operation. In the third, a young litigator surrounded by stacks of digital binders. Each car contained 1 or 2 people, all focused, all working, and all looking expectantly toward Julianne. This wasn't a ride. It was a mobile headquarters. Marcus burst out of the elevator on the ground floor, his tie slightly askew, his face flushed with fury and humiliation. He shoved past the startled doorman. Julianne, you stop right there! We need to discuss that financial statement. You can't just walk away from the agreement. Julianne paused just before stepping into the lead SUV. She turned back and looked at Marcus. He was sweating, his polished facade finally cracking. The agreement has been signed, Marcus, she stated simply. And I don't need to discuss my finances with you anymore. I never did. She turned to the security chief, the massive man holding the door open. We have exactly 45 minutes to reach Boeing Field. Ensure the traffic obstruction is minimal and alert the pilots that we are moving up the departure time. Yes, ma'am, the security chief confirmed, his voice deep and professional. As Julianne Thorn slid into the first SUV, settling into the plush leather seat and pulling a holographic tablet onto her lap, the door closed with a silent, pressurized thud. Marcus stood on the curb, watching in impotent rage as the 10 black behemoths, acting with military precision, began to pull away from the curb. The entire operation took less than 90 seconds. He watched the taillights disappear into the gray drizzle, feeling the cold, hard reality settle in. Julianne Thorn had just signed away her marriage to him, and in doing so she had revealed that she was not just wealthy, but a force of nature he had never bothered to acknowledge. He looked down at the financial statement still clutched in his hand. The net worth listed at the bottom was so high, it made his own fortune look like pocket change. He realized then that the $5 million he offered her wasn't a generous settlement. It was a non-disclosure agreement he had failed to enforce, and now she was gone. But where was she going? And why did she need a mobile war room just to get to the airport? Marcus stumbled back into the lobby, demanding answers from the terrified staff. The story, however, was just beginning. Julianne Thorne had spent 8 years preparing for her exit, and the 10 SUVs were merely the first public announcement of her return to power. The truth was, Julianne wasn't just wealthy. She was the ghost investor behind the biggest disruption in the robotics sector that year, a tech giant Marcus had spent months trying and failing to acquire. And she was heading straight to Boston to finalize the deal that would utterly dismantle Vance Dynamics, a deal she had orchestrated from Marcus's own gilded cage. The moment the pressurized seal of the SUV door locked Julianne inside, the noise of Seattle disappeared. It wasn't just soundproofing. It was a transition from one world to another. The interior of the lead vehicle was less a car and more a command center. The lighting was amber and focused. Across from her sat Elena Rostova, the woman Julianne had seen earlier wearing the smart glasses. Elena was the chief strategy officer for the Thorne Sovereign Fund, a woman whose reputation in global equity was legendary, but who had operated under extreme secrecy for the last 4 years, answering only to Julianne. Beside Elena was Liam Chen, a corporate attorney whose specialty was hostile mergers and clean, surgical legal warfare. He had the calm demeanor of a man who enjoyed watching empires fall. "Report, Elena," Julianne said, not wasting a second on small talk or looking out the window. She activated her tablet. Elena didn't look up from her data stream. "The market has absorbed the news of the finalized divorce, ma'am. Zero movement on the Vance Dynamics stock. Marcus's PR team has done an efficient job of keeping the settlement details out of the press. For now, he looks like the generous victim." "Good," Julianne replied, nodding. "We need him complacent for exactly 6 more hours. What is the status of Protocol Zero?" Liam Chen cleared his throat, adjusting his cuff. "Protocol Zero is fully activated, Julianne. The legal team is deployed across the 10 vehicles. We have the final acquisition binders for Aeon Robotics signed and ready for the executive team's authorization. We have 12 hours until the 6 a.m. EST deadline for the full merger announcement." Julianne leaned forward, the Visconti pen, the one Marcus gave her, now resting innocently on top of a 300-page contract summary. "Confirm the secondary objective of Protocol Zero, Liam." "Confirmed, ma'am," Liam stated, his voice flat and professional. "Once the Ion merger is announced, we simultaneously release the evidence packet regarding Vance Dynamics' proprietary software licensing practices, specifically concerning the Pegasus protocols. This will trigger the SEC inquiry and a mandatory trading freeze on Vance Dynamics stock." Julianne allowed herself a small, cold smile. That was the real punch. The $5 million Marcus had given her 6 years ago had funded the original investment in Ion Robotics. But the years she spent managing Marcus's foundation and signing his charity contracts had given her unprecedented access to his entire corporate infrastructure, including the internal documents detailing his illegal back-channel deals. "The Pegasus protocols," Julianne murmured. "That information is the reason Marcus forced me to close my literacy foundation. He thought I was too close to the grant writers, too close to people who might ask questions. He thought he was isolating me. He was actually giving me the keys to his kingdom." The convoy moved with impossible speed and efficiency, the other 9 SUVs acting as perfectly choreographed blockers, clearing the route through the bustling Seattle streets toward the highway. Every minute counted. "And the team in the other vehicles?" Julianne asked. "All deployed," Elena confirmed. "Unit 2 has the tech support and systems architects finalizing the integration infrastructure. Unit 5 has the PR and media relations team drafting the official Thorne Sovereign Statement. Unit 7 holds the accounting and forensic auditing team ready to file the SEC documents the second we land. We are a fully functional mobile corporation." Julianne looked out the tinted window, catching a brief glimpse of the lead security guard, Kyle, running interference with a traffic drone. Everything was under control. "Let's accelerate the pace," Julianne commanded. "I want to be airborne in 30 minutes. Meanwhile, 52 floors above the chaos, Marcus Vance was having a meltdown that was rapidly approaching critical mass. He was back in the conference room, still clutching the financial statement like a death warrant. Abernathy, the nervous divorce lawyer, was trying desperately to make a phone call, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead. $5 billion, Abernathy. "This statement says $5 billion, Marcus yelled, slamming his fist down on the teak table. The Visconti pen cap skittered across the polished surface. She was running a fund larger than most small countries, while I was telling her which napkins to use for the governor's luncheon. Abernathy finally managed to connect with the building security chief. "The convoy, sir. They are gone. They moved with military precision. The security chief confirms they were all registered under the Thorn Trust, but the lead vehicle was heading directly to Boeing Field, specifically the private terminal." Marcus's eyes narrowed. Boeing Field, private terminal. Boston. The pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. "Ion Robotics," Marcus hissed, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "The East Coast disruptor, the one we've been trying to buy for 9 months, the one that keeps blocking our bids, the one that's developing the neural link software that threatens our entire legacy system. Fortum." He looked at Abernathy, his face a mask of furious realization. "Julianne is the ghost owner of Ion Robotics. She's the one who's been laughing at my offers. She's the one who's been driving up the price." Marcus ripped out his own phone and barked orders into it, pacing the room like a caged lion. "Get me Len in corporate security. I want every file, every email, every financial transaction Julianne Thorne has ever touched. Get our private jet ready for immediate takeoff to Boston Logan and find me the name of the CEO of Ion Robotics. I need to know who she's meeting." Abernathy, overwhelmed, managed a faint protest. "Marcus, perhaps we should focus on the legal implications of the divorce agreement first." "The divorce agreement is irrelevant," Marcus spat. "That was her misdirection. This is a hostile takeover. She signed the papers to liquidate her personal liability to me, so she could legally launch an attack on Vance Dynamics. She's not just taking my money, Abernathy. She's taking my life's work." Marcus stopped pacing and looked out the window, where the traffic was slowly returning to normal, the only evidence of Julianne's passing being the lingering, luxurious silence. "She played the silent, pretty wife for 8 years, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I should have known. Nobody stays that quiet unless they are planning something truly deafening." He checked the time. Julianne was likely already in the air, miles ahead. He had to mobilize his entire legal and financial defense team, and he had to do it without alerting the press that his ex-wife was simultaneously his biggest business threat. "Boston," Marcus muttered. "She thinks she's going to close the deal and watch me burn. We'll see about that." 35 minutes later, Julianne's convoy swept onto the tarmac of the private terminal at Boeing Field. The scene was perfectly orchestrated. Her private jet, a sleek Bombardier Global 8000, painted a discreet charcoal gray, not the flashy white of Marcus's aircraft, was waiting, engines running. As the 10 SUVs parked in a tight semicircle around the jet, the doors opened again, and the team members emerged, carrying briefcases and laptops, transforming the tarmac into a temporary high-stakes briefing area. Julianne, escorted by Kyle, walked directly up the boarding ramp. She paused at the top and looked back at her team. "We have 4 hours and 45 minutes of flight time," she announced, her voice clear and carrying over the low whine of the jet engines. "Elena, I want a full vulnerability assessment of the Vance Dynamics stock profile by the time we hit cruising altitude. Liam, finalize the documentation needed to freeze Marcus's personal assets immediately upon the announcement. We are not just acquiring Aeon, We are ensuring the Vance Group cannot mount a counterattack." The professionalism of her team was astonishing. There was no hesitation, no wasted movement. These were people who understood that Julianne Thorne was not just an investor. She was a conductor leading a highly skilled orchestra of disruption. As she stepped inside the jet, the flight attendant, a man who looked more like an executive assistant than cabin crew, handed Julianne a fresh cup of herbal tea and a secure satellite phone. "Marcus Vance's Gulfstream is being fueled now, ma'am," the attendant reported calmly. "Estimated takeoff in 40 minutes. We are still ahead of him." Julianne settled into her seat. The roar of the engines was a comforting sound. She looked at Elena, who was already deep into her analysis. "He's panicking," Julianne observed softly. "He hates losing control more than anything." "He's underestimating you, ma'am," Elena said, finally looking up. "He's looking for the wife he discarded. He's not looking for the owner of the Thorne Sovereign Fund." "Exactly," Julianne replied, pulling a laptop out of her bag. "And that is his fatal flaw." She opened the laptop to a single document, the original business plan for Ion Robotics, written 8 years ago, shortly after her wedding. It wasn't about neural links then. It was about creating a sustainable, ethical tech platform. Marcus had laughed at the idea, called it naive, and told her to focus on the flower arrangements for the gala. Julianne had taken his dismissal and weaponized it. She spent the next 5 hours of the flight working, not resting. She was preparing for the final meeting with the Ion Robotics board, a meeting that would cement her position not just as the primary investor, but as the new chairperson. The plan, Protocol Zero, was perfect. It was a classic pincer movement. The financial acquisition of Ion Robotics provided the motive, and the simultaneous release of the Pegasus contract data provided the legal detonation. The result, Marcus Vance's empire would collapse under its own weight, exactly where he thought he was untouchable, the stock market. 5 hours later, the Global 8000 touched down smoothly at Hanscom Field outside Boston. The autumn foliage was blazing orange and red, a sharp contrast to the gray Seattle rain. The transition from the plane to the ground transportation was seamless. Instead of armored SUVs this time, a fleet of high-end electric sedans waited, ready to blend into the Cambridge traffic. The team split up. Elena and Liam headed directly to the legal firm overseeing the merger details. Julianne, however, headed straight for the Ion Robotics headquarters, a breathtakingly modern brick and glass structure in the heart of Kendall Square. As Julianne entered the lobby, she was met not by security guards, but by the entire executive board of Ion Robotics. They were younger, diverse, and energized. They treated her not as a benefactor, but as a visionary leader. The CEO of Ion, a brilliant 29-year-old named Ravi, rushed forward to greet her. "Julianne, we were tracking your flight. Marcus Vance's jet just landed at Logan. He's rushing to meet with his corporate counsel," Ravi reported, his excitement barely contained. "He's scrambling to put together a restraining order, but Liam Chen's preemptive filings have blocked every avenue." Julianne shook Ravi's hand, her composure absolute. "He can try, Ravi, but he's playing checkers, and we're playing 4D chess. Is the final merger document ready for my signature?" "It's in the boardroom, Julianne," Ravi confirmed. "Once you sign, the press release goes live, and the Vance Group is officially on notice." Julianne walked through the sleek, open-plan offices of Ion Robotics. This was her creation. This was the result of 8 years of quiet work, of pretending to be a woman focused only on linens and seating charts. She had designed this moment to be irreversible. She stepped into the panoramic boardroom. The view was spectacular, looking out over the Charles River and the Boston skyline. "Let's sign the documents," Julianne said, taking her seat at the head of the long glass table. As the documents were spread out, Ravi's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and his face suddenly drained of color. Julianne, Ravi whispered, looking up, his eyes wide with shock. We have a problem. Not a legal one, but a physical one. Marcus Vance is not heading to his lawyers. He just bypassed their office. Where is he going? Julianne asked, not pausing as she reached for the pen. He is heading straight for this building, Ravi reported, his voice tight with alarm. His security detail just pulled up to the main entrance. He's coming here, Julianne. He's coming to confront you before you sign. Julianne paused, the Visconti pen hovering an inch above the final signature line of the Ion Robotics merger agreement. She looked out the window down at the street below. Sure enough, a small, aggressive convoy of SUVs, far less coordinated than her own, was pulling up. She didn't look worried. She looked intrigued. Marcus has always preferred a theatrical flourish, Julianne observed, a genuine, powerful smile finally breaking across her face. He thinks if he can stop the signature, he can stop the inevitable. He's about to learn that my signature is the least of his concerns. She put the pen down deliberately. Ravi, call security. Tell them to escort Mr. Vance directly up to the boardroom. Let him watch. Julianne leaned back in her chair, waiting. She had spent 8 years planning her exit. Now it was time for the grand finale. The wedding was over. The divorce was finalized. And the hostile takeover was about to be witnessed by the very man she was dismantling. Julianne settled deeper into the ergonomic chair, the cool glass of the boardroom table beneath her fingertips. She was surrounded by the young, energized faces of the Ion Robotics executive team, but her focus was entirely on the double doors. The tension in the room was so thick you could have sliced it with a laser cutter. Ravi, the CEO, looked ready to bolt, his eyes glued to the holographic clock. The merger document lay open, waiting, the final page gleaming white under the smart lighting. Julianne, are you sure about this? Ravi whispered, leaning in. We can sign now. Why give him the satisfaction of a scene? Julianne smiled, a slow, patient gesture that didn't quite reach her eyes. Because, Ravi, Marcus doesn't understand satisfaction. He only understands consequence. If I sign this without him here, it's a business transaction. If I sign it with him here, it's a lesson. And Marcus Vance desperately needs a lesson. The wait lasted only 3 agonizing minutes. Then the heavy oak doors of the boardroom burst open, not gently, but violently, slamming against the interior wall with a loud thwack. Marcus Vance stormed in, followed by 2 of his personal security detail and a very frantic-looking Ravi's assistant, who was trying desperately to apologize for letting him through. Marcus didn't look like the tailored CEO who had dismissed Julianne hours earlier. He looked like a cornered animal. His Tom Ford suit was rumpled, his hair slightly disheveled from the frantic rush, and his face was a mottled mask of crimson fury. "Julianne!" he roared, his voice echoing in the glass room. He ignored the dozen highly successful people sitting around the table and focused solely on his ex-wife. "What in the hell do you think you're doing? This is corporate espionage. This is fraud. You cannot possibly be the owner of this company." Julianne didn't flinch. She simply gestured toward an empty chair at the far end of the table. "Welcome, Marcus. I'm glad you could join us. We were just about to finalize a very important deal. Please, have a seat." Marcus ignored the chair. He slammed his palms down on the table right next to the merger document. "I want to see the financials. I want to see the chain of ownership. You signed a non-disclosure agreement, Julianne. You cannot launch a business venture that directly competes with the Vance Group." "Did I, Marcus?" Julianne asked, her voice calm and conversational, cutting through his rage like a scalpel. "Show me where in the dissolution agreement it forbids me from holding independent investments. Show me where it lists the Thorn Sovereign Fund as a competing venture. You were so focused on ensuring I couldn't claim any of your future earnings that you entirely neglected to secure your past liabilities." She picked up the Visconti pen, rolling the cold obsidian between her fingers. You gave me $5 million 6 years ago, Marcus. That was seed money. That money was mine, earned through my father's estate, not yours. You told me to hide it, didn't you? You told me not to embarrass you with silly hobbies. I took your advice. I hid it. I invested it ethically, legally, and strategically, specifically into Ion Robotics, a company you dismissed as a left-wing coding collective. Marcus backed away slightly, his eyes darting between Julianne and Ravi, who was watching the scene with fascinated horror. The Pegasus protocols, Marcus stammered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. That's how you knew. The licensing irregularities. Abernathy told me you were too focused on the catering to notice details. Oh, I noticed every detail, Marcus, Julianne confirmed sweetly. 8 years in your house, running your life, managing your foundation. I saw everything. I saw the charity money you skimmed. I saw the back channel deals. I saw the proprietary software you were licensing to foreign entities without proper governmental oversight. You thought I was reading cookbooks. I was reading your internal audit reports. She leaned forward, her composure now a terrifying weapon. You built a golden cage for me, Marcus. But you made one critical mistake. You left the library open, and I learned to read the blueprint of your entire prison. Marcus pointed a shaking finger at the merger document. If you sign that, I will tie you up in court for the next 20 years. I will sue Ion Robotics for corporate raiding. You will never be able to execute this merger. Julianne simply shrugged. You could certainly try. But as of 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, your legal team is going to be rather busy defending the Vance Group against much larger concerns. She looked at Ravi. Is the press release ready, Ravi? Ravi, finally finding his nerve, nodded sharply. Ready to go, Julianne, the moment the ink is dry. Julianne looked back at Marcus, who was now breathing hard, sweat beading on his temples. He was watching his entire world crumble, and he couldn't stop it. You wanted me to sign the divorce papers quietly, Marcus, Julianne said, holding the Visconti poised above the signature line. I did. Now, watch me sign the death warrant of your empire. She pressed the pen firmly to the paper. The sound of the nib scratching across the heavy stock was loud and decisive. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on her past and a foundation being laid for her future. Julianne Thorne. As she lifted the pen, Ravi's phone instantly vibrated. He didn't even need to look at it. It's done, Ravi announced, his voice ringing with triumph. The merger between Ion Robotics and Thorne Sovereign Fund is finalized. The press release is live globally. Marcus stumbled backward, clutching the edge of the table for support. No, you can't. Abernathy, call Abernathy. Julianne held up a hand. He can't help you, Marcus. He's probably already retained by the SEC. Just then, the satellite phone on the table, the one Liam Chen had used on the flight, rang. A high, urgent chirp. Julianne picked it up on the first ring. Elena, report. The voice on the other end, though filtered through the speaker, was crisp and professional. Protocol 0, secondary objective confirmed, ma'am. The documentation regarding the Pegasus protocols has been submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice. The data is irrefutable. We have confirmation of an emergency trading freeze on all Vance Group assets, effective immediately, pending a full investigation into licensing irregularities and financial fraud. Julianne hung up the phone. She looked at Marcus, who was now staring blankly at the window, the Boston skyline a silent witness to his downfall. Trading freeze, Marcus whispered, the words barely audible. My stock is locked. My company is worthless until they clear this up. And they won't clear it up quickly, Marcus, Julianne stated gently. The Pegasus protocols are complex. They involve years of obfuscation and shell companies. It will take months, perhaps years, to untangle the legal mess you created. And in the meantime, the Vance Group has zero liquidity, zero ability to counterbid, and zero market confidence. She rose slowly from the chair, the Visconti pen still in her hand. You see, Marcus, the $5 million wasn't the generous settlement you offered me. It was the cost of the key to your kingdom, and I used it to lock you out. Marcus finally moved. He lunged across the table, his face distorted with pure, blinding hatred. You manipulative, deceitful... Before he could finish the accusation, the two massive security guards who had followed him into the room immediately stepped between him and Julianne. They didn't touch him, but their sheer size and silent presence were enough to stop him cold. Julianne walked around the table, ignoring Marcus completely. She addressed the Ion Robotics team. Gentlemen, ladies, the celebratory period is exactly 60 seconds. We have an empire to integrate. Ravi, I want full integration plans for the Neuralink software prepared for review by 3:00 p.m. Liam Chen's team is already finalizing the necessary legal firewalls to defend against Marcus's inevitable desperate legal Hail Marys. We have to move faster than he can rage. She walked toward the door, her team instantly rising to follow her, energized by her calm authority. Marcus watched her go, leaning heavily on the table, his earlier fury replaced by a chilling, hollow despair. He wasn't just losing his wife, he was losing his war, he was losing his identity. As Julianne reached the door, she paused, looking back at the wreckage of the man who had once been her husband. You know, Marcus, she said, her voice soft, almost pitying. You always told me I lacked acumen, but you lacked vision. You never saw me because you were always looking down. She stepped out of the boardroom, leaving Marcus Vance alone in the silent, glass-walled room, surrounded by the remnants of the merger he couldn't stop, and the digital confirmation of the stock freeze he couldn't lift. Julianne and the Ion team descended to the ground floor in a private elevator, the mood shifting from tense anticipation to focused execution. The lobby was now clear of Marcus's desperate security detail. Where is Marcus Vance now, Ravi? Julianne asked, as they stepped into a waiting sedan. Still in the boardroom, ma'am, Ravi reported, checking his phone. His security detail is waiting for him, but he hasn't moved. He's probably calling Abernathy, but Abernathy is likely refusing his calls right now. Julianne nodded. That was exactly what she wanted. Marcus needed time to process the full weight of the collapse alone, without the immediate ability to mount a counterattack. Elena, I need you and Liam to stay here in Boston, Julianne instructed, as the sedan pulled out into the autumn sunshine. Run point on the integration and ensure the SEC cooperation is flawless. I need to be in London tonight. Elena looked surprised. London? For the next phase of Protocol Zero? No, Julianne replied, adjusting her jacket. The next phase is already running itself. London is personal. There's one last loose end I need to tie up before I can truly focus on Ion Robotics. The sedan merged seamlessly onto the highway, escorted by two discreet Thorn Sovereign security vehicles. The scale of the operation had shrunk from 10 SUVs in Seattle to 3 sedans in Boston, but the power behind it was infinitely greater. As they drove toward the airport, the magnitude of what she had just accomplished settled in. She hadn't just gotten a divorce. She had executed a flawless corporate coup, all while appearing to be nothing more than a wealthy socialite. Julianne, Ravi said tentatively from the back seat. The market reaction to the Ion merger is incredibly positive. We are being hailed as the new standard in ethical tech. But the news about the Vance Group trading freeze is going to cause a global shockwave. Are you prepared for the scrutiny? I've been prepared for 8 years, Ravi, Julianne assured him. For 8 years I was under the most intense public scrutiny imaginable, constantly judged by Marcus's standards. Now the scrutiny is on my terms. Thorn Sovereign Fund is built on transparency and ethical practice. The world will see that Marcus Vance was the criminal, and I am the corrective measure. She pulled out her laptop again. The screen was filled not with financial reports, but with architectural blueprints. "Before I go to London, I need to finalize the plans for the Queen Anne property," Julianne said, referring to the damp brownstone Marcus had so condescendingly given her in the divorce settlement. Ravi frowned. "Queen Anne? You're keeping the house he gave you? Why?" Julianne smiled, a genuine warm smile this time. "He gave me the house and told me it was perfectly adequate for a single woman with no career prospects. He thought he was giving me a cage. But it's in a perfect neighborhood, Ravi. Excellent structural integrity, historic zoning." She pointed to the blueprint on her screen. "I'm not keeping the house to live in. I'm renovating it. I'm turning it into the flagship location for the Thorne Institute." Ravi blinked. "Your literacy foundation? The one Marcus forced you to close?" "The very same," Julianne confirmed. "But this time it won't be a small, struggling venture. The Thorne Institute will be funded by the Trust, focused on digital literacy, coding for underprivileged youth, and ethical AI development. It will be the antithesis of everything Marcus stood for. It will be the perfect, permanent monument to his defeat, right in his own city." The sedan pulled up to a modest private airstrip north of Boston. A smaller, faster jet was waiting. A Citation X Plus, designed for quick intercontinental hops. "Ravi, Elena," Julianne said, shaking their hands firmly. "You have your orders. I'll be back in 2 days. Keep the Vance Group frozen and Ion running hot." As Julianne boarded the Citation, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the tarmac. She settled into the seat, the reality of her newfound freedom washing over her. The destination was Heathrow, London. Meanwhile, Marcus Vance was finally emerging from the boardroom in Cambridge hours later. He was a ghost of his former self. His face was gray, his eyes bloodshot, and his suit jacket was draped over his shoulder, forgotten. He found his security detail waiting, but they looked uneasy. He had spent the last 2 hours screaming into the phone at Abernathy, who had finally admitted he couldn't lift the trading freeze. Marcus had also tried to call his bank, only to find his personal accounts were now under mandatory review, thanks to the SEC inquiry. "Get me back to Seattle," Marcus rasped, his throat raw. "I need to get to my headquarters. I need to rally the board." His security chief, a man named Henderson, looked uncomfortable. "Sir, your jet, the Gulfstream, it was grounded at Logan for a safety inspection by the FAA just minutes after the SEC announcement." Marcus stared at him. "Grounded? The FAA doesn't ground my jet. That's Julianne. She did this." Henderson shifted his weight. "We managed to charter a commercial flight, first class, to Seattle-Tacoma. It leaves in 90 minutes. Marcus Vance, the titan of industry who hadn't flown commercial in 30 years, was forced to walk through the main terminal, his humiliation complete. On the flight back, huddled in the cramped first-class seat, Marcus tried desperately to salvage something. He opened his secure laptop, intending to access the Vance Group's internal network to try and find a legal loophole in the Pegasus contracts. He typed his password. Access denied. He tried his backup password. Access denied. A small notification popped up on the screen. A simple black box with white text. "This system is now under the authority of Thorne Sovereign Fund Forensic Audit Team. Access is locked pending investigation." Marcus slammed the laptop shut. Julianne hadn't just taken his company. She had locked him out of his own data before he even left Boston. He realized the full depth of her planning. The silent years, the quiet access, the complete mastery of his corporate infrastructure. She hadn't been planning a divorce. She had been planning a total annexation. But why London? She was in London. Marcus remembered the last conversation they had about London years ago. It was about her father. Julianne's father, Arthur Thorne, had been a distinguished diplomat and collector in Kensington. When Julianne was 22, Arthur had fallen ill. Marcus, then just a powerful, charming suitor, had promised Julianne he would ensure her father received the best care. He had even helped Julianne sell her father's townhouse and assets to pay for a specialized clinic. Julianne's move to London meant she was going back to the beginning. Marcus felt a flicker of hope amidst the wreckage. If she was focused on something sentimental, something personal, perhaps she was distracted. Perhaps she was vulnerable. He had to find out what she was doing in London. He had to find that vulnerability. 2 hours later, Julianne Thorne stepped off the Citation X Plus at Heathrow. It was early morning, and the air was cool and damp. There were no SUVs waiting this time, only a single, unmarked black saloon. Her security chief, Kyle, was waiting at the bottom of the ramp. "Welcome to London, ma'am," Kyle said, opening the car door. "The meeting has been confirmed for 9 a.m. tomorrow. The location is secure." "Good," Julianne replied, sliding into the back seat. "Any word from Marcus?" "He's on a commercial flight back to Seattle," Kyle confirmed. "He looks distressed. We've also intercepted communication indicating he's trying to track your movements, specifically your destination in London." Julianne smiled faintly. "Let him track me. Let him believe I'm distracted. He needs to think I'm chasing ghosts." The saloon sped toward central London. Julianne didn't look at financial reports or merger documents. She looked out the window at the passing lights of the M4. The next morning, Julianne was driven to a quiet, upscale neighborhood in Kensington. The saloon pulled up to a beautiful Victorian townhouse. It didn't look like a corporate office. It looked like a private residence. Julianne stepped out, dressed impeccably in a soft camel trench coat, looking every bit the sophisticated global citizen. She walked up the steps and was greeted by an older woman with kind eyes and impeccably styled silver hair. A woman who looked like she ran the world without raising her voice. "Julianne, darling, it's been too long," the woman said, embracing her warmly. "Lady Margaret," Julianne replied, returning the hug. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." Lady Margaret led Julianne into a sunlit drawing room where a large framed portrait dominated one wall. It was a painting Julianne knew intimately, one of her father's favorites. "I imagine you didn't fly here just to look at Arthur's collection," Lady Margaret prompted, sitting opposite Julianne. Lady Margaret wasn't just an old family friend. She was Margaret Sterling, no relation to Marcus, one of the most respected and powerful solicitors in London real estate. "I need your help, Margaret," Julianne began, getting straight to the point. 8 years ago, when my father was ill, Marcus helped me sell his townhouse and the collection. He told me he secured the best price to cover the medical expenses." "I remember," Lady Margaret said, her face clouding slightly. "It was a shame. Arthur's home was a landmark." "Marcus handled the sale through an intermediary," Julianne continued, "a shell corporation called Redwood Holdings, and I want to know who owns Redwood Holdings now, and I want to buy the property back." Lady Margaret looked surprised. "Marcus sold the townhouse years ago. It's a very valuable property now. It's currently owned by a private trust. It was never listed publicly." Julianne leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, intense level. "That's where I need your expertise, Margaret. I need to know the ultimate beneficial owner of that trust. I suspect Marcus never actually sold it. I suspect he merely transferred the deed to himself through layers of shell corporations, pretending he liquidated the asset for my benefit." Lady Margaret's eyes widened. "If Marcus Vance manipulated your father's assets while he was dying, that's not just unethical, Julianne. That's criminal." "Precisely," Julianne confirmed. "He told me he was protecting me from financial stress. He was actually stealing my inheritance. I want the townhouse back, Margaret. I want my father's home back. And I want the Thorne Institute to have a London chapter." Lady Margaret smiled, a sharp, knowing glint in her eyes. "Marcus Vance may have mastered corporate finance, but he never understood UK property law. Give me 3 hours. I'll peel back those layers of shells for you. 3 hours later, Julianne was sitting back in the saloon, driving toward the airport for her return flight to Seattle. She held a thick, embossed folder. Inside was the complete ownership history of the townhouse. Lady Margaret had been right. Marcus hadn't sold the property. He had transferred it multiple times, always maintaining control, and had been collecting the massive rental income from the property for the last 8 years. He had effectively stolen millions of dollars in income from Julianne's inheritance. This was the final piece of the puzzle. The financial destruction of the Vance Group was complete in Boston. The personal destruction of Marcus Vance would be finalized in Seattle using the very thing he thought he had successfully buried, Julianne's past. The plan was now complete. Protocol Zero was fully operational. As her plane took off, heading back toward the Pacific Northwest, Julianne looked at the folder. She wasn't just returning to Seattle to check on the progress of the Vance Group's demise. She was returning to deliver the final personal blow. She opened her secure laptop and sent a single encrypted email to Liam Chen, the corporate lawyer in Boston. Subject: Protocol 0, Phase 3, the Thorne Townhouse. Action: prepare the legal documentation for the civil suit against Marcus Vance for theft of inheritance and fraudulent conveyance of assets. File it simultaneously with the SEC's criminal charges. I want it filed in King County Superior Court at 9 a.m. PST tomorrow morning. Julianne leaned back, feeling a deep, profound sense of justice. She had signed the divorce papers in silence, but the 10 SUVs were the opening salvo. The hostile takeover of Ion Robotics was the war. The fight for her father's townhouse was the final act of vengeance. She was going to take everything from Marcus, his company, his reputation, and the last shred of dignity he thought he still possessed. The story wasn't over. It was just moving back home for the grand finale. Julianne Thorne was coming back to Seattle, and Marcus Vance had no idea what was about to hit him next. Julianne's citation touched down outside Seattle just as the city lights began to sparkle in the early morning darkness. She didn't land at SeaTac, knowing Marcus would have his remaining resources tracking arrivals there. She chose a smaller, discreet airfield near Renton, allowing her to slip back into the city like a quiet shadow. The exact opposite of her grand departure 2 days prior. Kyle, her security chief, was waiting. The transition was swift and silent. "Report on Mr. Vance, Kyle," Julianne instructed as they pulled onto the highway. "He landed at SeaTac an hour ago, ma'am," Cale confirmed, checking his rearview mirror. "He bypassed his corporate headquarters, which is currently swarming with federal auditors. He tried to check into the Vance Tower's penthouse, but access was denied. The building is technically a Vance Group asset, now frozen." Julianne nodded, a small, grim satisfaction tightening her jaw. "Where is he now?" "He's desperate, ma'am. He's bouncing between low-profile hotels trying to find a lawyer who hasn't already been served with subpoenas related to the SEC investigation. He's completely isolated. We believe he's trying to find you." "He knows I'm back in the city," Julianne murmured. "He's looking for the wife he bullied, hoping for a plea bargain, or perhaps just a final argument. He needs to witness his destruction to believe it." She looked out at the familiar Seattle streets, the rain-soaked city that had been her gilded prison for 8 years. "Take me to Queen Anne," Julianne commanded. Marcus Vance was losing his grip. He was pacing a cramped, ugly hotel room near Pike Place Market, the phone hot against his ear. He was trying to call Abernathy, his divorce lawyer, but the line just rang busy. He tried his CEO assistant, only to find the line disconnected. He was a man accustomed to having an army at his disposal. Now he couldn't even order room service without worrying about the bill. He had burned through 3 separate burner phones trying to contact anyone who wasn't currently under investigation. The SEC trading freeze was absolute. His fortune, the only thing he truly valued, was locked away, pending the outcome of a criminal inquiry he couldn't control. Then a text message arrived on the last functional phone he possessed. It was from an unknown number, but the content was chillingly familiar. Queen Anne, 9 a.m. We need to discuss the deed. Queen Anne. The damp, inadequate brownstone he had tossed to Julianne as a parting gift. Marcus saw a glimmer of hope. She was there. She was hiding there, vulnerable, perhaps ready to negotiate to stop the civil suits he knew were coming. If he could confront her face to face, maybe he could intimidate her into stopping the legal avalanche she had unleashed. He grabbed his rumpled jacket and rushed out of the hotel, flagging down a taxi, the ultimate indignity. "Queen Anne Hill!" he barked at the driver, giving the address he had so casually signed over a few days earlier. When Marcus's taxi screeched to a halt outside the Queen Anne property, the scene was not what he expected. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't a place of hiding. The entire street was cordoned off. Instead of yellow tape, there were sleek black velvet ropes guarded by two of Kyle's massive security team. A dozen workers in clean, dark uniforms were swarming the entrance, unloading specialized equipment, including scaffolding, lighting rigs, and architectural drawings. The small wrought iron gate that led to the entrance was already emblazoned with a temporary, discreet sign. Thorn Institute, flagship location, opening soon. Marcus staggered out of the taxi, leaving the fare unpaid. "What is this? What is going on here?" He pushed past the velvet rope, only to be stopped by Kyle, who appeared seemingly out of nowhere, blocking the narrow entrance with a calm, immovable presence. "Mr. Vance," Kyle said, his voice flat, "this property is now under the jurisdiction of Thorn Sovereign Fund. You are not authorized to enter." "I owned this property 3 days ago," Marcus hissed, adjusting his tie, trying desperately to regain some semblance of control. "I gave it to her. I have the right to inspect it." "The deed transfer is complete, sir," Kale replied smoothly, "and Ms. Thorne is currently inside with her legal team preparing for a press conference." Marcus felt a cold wave of realization wash over him. A press conference. She wasn't hiding. She was launching the next phase of her operation from the very property he had dismissed. "Let me in, Kyle. I need to speak to her." "This has gone far enough," Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking with genuine fear. Just then, the front door of the brownstone opened. Julianne Thorne stepped out onto the small porch. She was wearing the same elegant coat, her hair perfectly in place, and she held a sheaf of papers in her hand. She looked composed, powerful, and utterly detached. She was flanked by Liam Chen, the corporate lawyer who had flown in from Boston overnight, and Lady Margaret, the London solicitor who had apparently flown in as well, looking like she was thoroughly enjoying the show. "Marcus," Julianne said, her voice carrying the clear, cool authority of a CEO, not a supplicant wife. "I was wondering if you would make it." Marcus rushed toward the porch, ignoring Kyle's warning glance. "Julianne, we need to talk about the SEC. This is madness. If I go down, the market collapses. You will lose everything you just acquired with Ion Robotics." Julianne watched him, her expression unreadable. "You think I didn't calculate that, Marcus? The Vance Group is being dismantled, not destroyed. The ethical assets will be acquired by Thorn Sovereign. The liabilities will be dealt with by the DOJ. The market will stabilize. Your legacy, however, is about to be liquidated." She walked down the steps toward him, holding out the thick folder she had brought from London. "You came here to talk about the deed to this property, Marcus," Julianne continued. "Let's talk about the deeds." She handed him the folder. Marcus took it, his hands shaking. "That's the documentation proving that 8 years ago, under the guise of helping me pay my father's medical bills, you fraudulently conveyed the deed to my father's Kensington townhouse to a shell corporation you control," Julianne explained. her voice low and devastatingly precise. You then collected the rental income from that property for the last 8 years, totaling approximately $18 million. That, Marcus, is outright theft. Marcus stared at the documents, the color draining from his face. This wasn't corporate maneuvering. This was personal criminal fraud involving his deceased father-in-law. You can't prove that, Marcus stammered weakly, clutching the folder. Liam Chen, the lawyer, stepped forward, his face devoid of emotion. Mr. Vance, at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, a civil suit was filed in King County Superior Court on behalf of the estate of Arthur Thorne, naming you personally as the defendant for fraudulent conveyance and theft of assets. Furthermore, the evidence has been forwarded to the Department of Justice, which we anticipate will result in an immediate amendment to the existing SEC complaint, adding charges of wire fraud and organized racketeering. Julianne stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. You thought you were giving me this little brownstone as a charitable handout, but you were actually just giving me a convenient address to serve you the papers for grand larceny. Marcus dropped the folder, the documents scattering onto the wet pavement. He looked utterly defeated, the realization of his complete ruin finally settling in. He hadn't just lost his company, he was facing jail time, stripped of his personal wealth and protection. You planned this, Marcus whispered, the arrogance gone, replaced by a hollow echo of despair. From the beginning. You married me just to get close enough to destroy me. Julianne shook her head slowly. No, Marcus. I married you because I loved the man I thought you were. I stayed because I was trapped. I planned my exit for 8 years, yes. I built an empire in silence because you told me I was too stupid to do it out loud. She paused, letting the weight of her words crush him. You dismissed me as a trophy wife, a beautiful fixture, she finished. But a trophy is just a piece of metal. It has no power. I am the architect, Marcus, and now I'm building my own world on the foundation of your ruins. The sound of approaching sirens, quiet at first, began to grow louder. Marcus looked up, his eyes wide with panic. Those aren't mine, Cale confirmed to Julianne. They're local police, ma'am. I believe they are responding to the disturbance caused by Mr. Vance's unauthorized presence. As the squad cars pulled up, Marcus Vance, the man who once controlled billions and commanded deference across the globe, was left standing alone on a rainy Seattle sidewalk, surrounded by the physical evidence of his crimes and the beginning of Julianne's new life. He didn't resist when the uniformed officers approached him, alerted by the Thorne Trust security team about a disruptive individual interfering with construction. He was too broken to fight. Julianne watched calmly as Marcus Vance was escorted away, not in a limo, but in the back of a police cruiser. It was an ignominious end to a life of privilege. She turned and looked up at the facade of the Queen Anne building. The workers were now carefully measuring the space where the large Thorne Institute sign would soon hang permanently. Liam Chen offered her a satisfied smile. The press conference is set for 11 a.m., Julianne. We'll announce the official opening of the Thorne Institute, funded by the Thorne Sovereign Fund. We'll lead with the ethical framework of the new venture, and then casually drop the news about the Vance Group trading freeze. Excellent, Julianne replied, pulling a small black notebook from her handbag. It wasn't a Visconti. It was a simple, sturdy leather journal she had used to outline Protocol Zero. She flipped to the last page, where she had written a single final task: reclaim identity. She crossed it out with a confident stroke. Lady Margaret placed a comforting hand on Julianne's shoulder. What about the townhouse in London, Julianne? Do you want to sell it now that you have it back? Julianne looked at the woman who had helped her reclaim her legacy. No, Margaret. The Queen Anne location is the flagship, but the London townhouse will be the headquarters of the Thorne Sovereign Fund. I want to work in my father's home, surrounded by the art he loved. I want to build a legacy that is the polar opposite of the one I just helped dismantle. She walked back up the steps and into the house that Marcus had gifted her, ready to begin the renovation. The space was small, but the light was perfect, exactly as she remembered from her father's library. Julianne Thorne had signed the divorce papers in silence because she had no need to argue. Her argument was made by the 10 armored SUVs that announced the beginning of the end, the hostile takeover that proved her acumen, and the legal documents that reclaimed her past. She wasn't just wealthy. She was powerful. She wasn't just divorced. She was finally free. The silence was over. The work had just begun.